Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this live episode of Think Business. Looking forward to talking with DJ Hurula, founder and principal of Stereo Brand Agency. This is stereo.com. I'm reading the Amazon book right now, and it talks about every time Amazon is talked about, it says it's not Amazon, it's Amazon.com. So that's why this is stereo.com. I love it, which leads into our talk about branding. Your organization, your tagline, which I love, is power to the purposeful through branding. I'm adding that onto your tagline because you're a brand development agency. And I love the word purpose and purposeful and intent. And I think today in a post-COVID world, I think a lot of people are really connected to another company's purpose, which means that I think companies have to spend more time on their intent and their message. So it will lead to the consumer trusting the company. And so as a brand specialist who's all about purpose, how in today's world do the consumers trust the brands?
Yeah, I think purpose is one of those things where when people aren't careful, it gets thrown around like a buzzword, right? Yeah. And so it sort of starts to lose its meaning. And for me, I just take that as a challenge to make sure that when I use it, it's meaningful and it's not trite. I think generally for most industries and most customers, purpose ultimately isn't going to be the thing that sells them on why they buy. As a brand developer, I think purpose is extremely valuable because it's the force that focuses your team. Yeah. And running a business, being entrepreneurial is hard enough work. If you're going to work that hard at anything, you might as well work hard at something that extends beyond yourself, and that maximizes the impact of what your business can do beyond just make money. So we say that Stereo is for clients that are chasing greatness in excess of scale and purpose in excess of profit. It doesn't mean that being big is necessarily a bad thing. Although we would say that your business shouldn't be any bigger than it has to be to accomplish its mission in the world. But also purpose beyond profit is that profit's not a bad thing. We want our companies to stay in business. That's a necessary thing. We want to derive the rewards from it. But if you've been doing anything long enough, you're going to find that probably a motivation beyond just making money is something that you're going to need in order to stick with it. And frankly, to challenge yourself to do your best work. Yeah,
I love that. I want to talk a little bit about, because you have such great messaging on your site, and one of the things that you mentioned on your site is that you're a possibility company, and so I love that. But I think some people may, when they see that, they may pause for a minute and not understand what that means, and then you go to extend that you help close the gap between what is and what can be. And I find that sometimes, as a business coach, I find that sometimes there's a limit of law of proximity that people can see to a certain point, and to no fault of their own, they can't see past that point. And that's why I'm a big believer in mentors and companies and using experts to help stretch the vision. And so how do you articulate that to companies when it talks about possibility?
Yeah, the key metaphor, right, is that so our discipline is branding. That's our expertise. Core purpose, values. Ultimately, as we'll get to a second, I think ultimately the foundation of brand really is in corporate mindset and by extension, corporate culture. But what do we do? What do we get hired for? It's our ability to help clients who are inside the bottle read the label from outside of the bottle, right? Yeah. It's really hard to self-assess, and kind of, even when you are oriented towards the right things, it's hard to get a clear sense of who you really are just internally. So the greatest value that we have is in helping clients discover what the potential is for their business, and then create a path to how can we have their brand and their culture conspire to help them achieve that thing that they want to achieve. Yeah. That brand and culture are not just these passive things that are sort of along for the ride, but they are the tools, and they become the fuel that drives the engine to allow them to accomplish their business purpose. So ultimately, that's the value that we bring, and when we're engaged, that's what we're engaged for.
But I want to rewind for a minute to those who are not only listening right now, but later, as these podcasts always take a life of their own. Rewind a little bit and define the difference between branding and marketing.
Sure. And this is hotly contested, right? We could start
right.
World War III on LinkedIn with people who sometimes it seems like don't have anything better to do than argue about definitions of words. Reasonable people could disagree, but the way that I define those things, John, is the definition of brand that I rely on is Marty Neumeier's definition of brand, which is that a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or opportunity. So it's a gut feeling, which tells us that the decisions that we make, even though we try to be rational and thoughtful, are generally emotional and intuitive. And a brand is a person's feeling, because brands are defined on an individual basis. What one brand means to me, it may not mean to you or another person. It's us individually forming our impressions. In the simplest terms, brand is trust. Brand is trust based on reputation. And so when we talk about brand building, what we're really trying to do is get in the habit of consistently making decisions, patterns of behavior, actions that will reinforce the impression that we want to have in somebody's mind. And the deal is that, in the short term, you can try and manipulate what a brand means, but the only long-term strategy is really to manage it and to grow it. Marketing, on the other hand, and so there's the old school thought, right, was that brand was a subset of marketing, and that brand was kind of subservient to marketing. It was a tool that you used in the interest and in the service of marketing, and marketing is driving sales and spreading the idea of the company. And I think the new school idea is that brand really is the driver of everything.
Yeah.
If it is defined as trust and reputation, it's not your logo, it's not your tagline, it's not your product or your offering in the marketplace, but instead it's the piece of gray matter that somebody's got in their mind when they think of what your business stands for. So in that world, then what marketing is simply the spread of ideas. I think that's how Seth Godin has defined it. I think it's a great definition. And so in that case, if marketing is the spread of ideas, then brand is the idea itself.
Yeah. So marketing, excuse me. So marketing, from your perspective, is the spread of ideas. Seth Godin, I love. He's one of my favorites. And branding is the idea.
The idea itself.
Yeah. Right. I mean, simply put. Right. And so I love talking about branding and marketing. And as you talk about, brand is trust, right? Based on reputation and a gut feeling. How do you build trust today with a brand, right? Because I think there's different brands. Like if you're talking about, if a lot of times, if I'm talking to a company, I'm talking to them about, you have an internal brand and you have an external brand, right? And so a lot of times consumers they used to care about just the external brand. But now even we're seeing this in recruiting and recruits that come in. They want to know about the internal brand, the internal culture. And so branding to me has become much more multidimensional over the years. As a consumer, I may not buy a product because I don't like their internal brand or what I'm hearing or seeing in the paper. Fact or fiction, perception's reality. And so now as a branding company, how are you approaching it differently with companies as you look at the whole organic piece, not just the out-facing?
I think the thing that really differentiates Stereo is where we start when we start to, in our conceptualization of what a brand even is in the first place. Mm-hmm. Very oftentimes when you would engage a marketing firm particularly, but even a well-intended designer, they're going to start in kind of the top right quadrant of the scene and the visually expressed attributes of a brand, the logo, the tagline, the visuals, all the stuff that you can pick up, touch, feel, hold, right? And best case scenario, typically somebody who's a strategist will back that down and say like, well, those things are just sort of visual shorthand for what the brand is actually about. And let's dial it back to things like mission, vision, values, purpose. Your positioning is just discipline for market, what you do and for who. And we would say that's like a good step forward. But it doesn't really acknowledge where brand can come from if we're talking about a company that wants to, where authenticity is important and isn't just a buzzword. But like you said, really wants to develop deep levels of trust. Where do those things come from? They actually come from like a level down below, which makes the things that end up on the whiteboard believable.
Yeah.
Right? And that level is culture. It's organizational culture. Organizational culture, by my definition, and my understanding, my concept of brand is going to be the driver that makes it possible for a brand to be true.
Yeah.
We would say that product and experience makes a brand believable. Culture and leadership are the things that make a brand possible.
Yeah.
Right? And finally, the kind of the layer below culture is mindset. So the thoughts that leadership in an organization has and the way that those thoughts are framed and expressed are going to be the things that drive their corporate culture. Corporate culture will be a direct byproduct of the way we think about the circumstances we find ourselves in, or the way we use our thinking to create the circumstances that we want to be in.
Yeah.
So finally, the way that you'd build trust is over time. It's a long-term view, right? Trust is, you can't have very deep trust unless it's predicated on a relationship with somebody else who's, you and I know several people together in common. And so we trust each other predicated on those relationships.
Absolutely.
But direct trust is earned in the context of the relationship that the individual would have with the brand.
Yeah.
And what we would say is the potential to build trust is limited or expanded based on the ability of the brand to provide delight.
Yeah.
So the reason that people don't have a whole lot of, and I've talked to like contractor friends who feel differently about this, but the reason that most average people don't feel a whole lot of brand loyalty or preference if they go into Home Depot to buy a box of screws or bolts or nuts or whatever, is because there's not a lot of potential there for delight. Like the thing either works or it doesn't, but there's not a whole lot of enjoyment in it. The higher up we go on the scale, where the more sort of emotionally involved that somebody would be in the product or the purchase, the greater the potential is to delight them, and the stronger the brand and the reputation kind of comes to bear in that relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about as we talk about branding, and we're talking about trust and culture. I always think that a company's story, an individual's story, a salesperson's story, a CEO's story, their backstory is always so important to weave into the brand, that people feel emotionally connected, which I think is more important now than ever as people are working remotely, probably through the end of 2021 and moving into 2022. I think there's going to be some type of hybrid, right? And so when we talk about being purposeful, with your company, I think that people can connect with story relatively faster and easier. And so what's your thoughts on connecting story and brand?
It's essential, right?
Yeah.
And it's smart because it's impactful,
Yeah.
but also because it's the most efficient way to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
There are several reasons for that. Part of it is that stories, when they are told well, and let's make kind of a point in passing, right? That a lot of things that people call our story are not actually story. Story is the approach in the way that information is shared. So the fact that something is a video, or the fact that something seems to have visual narrative, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a story. In order for us to really have a story, we've got to kind of have protagonist and an antagonist, and we've got to have conflict, and we've got to have rising action, and we've got to have a resolution of that conflict and a falling action, all the things that we find in kind of the narrative sequence. But when we can package the information that we want to share, or when we can package our experience in that way, it becomes sort of just inherently more powerful, because humans are wired for that. Right. Depending on what your view is of how long humans have inhabited this planet, if you view that as, tens of thousands of years or millions of years or longer, during that period of time, a thing that humans have in common throughout history is this desire to sit around and tell each other stories.
Mm-hmm.
So when you can kind of storyfy something, you're already putting the information in terms that humans are going to gravitate towards. They're immediately open to receive, because it's something that I'm wired to want. It also makes the time that you're asking somebody to give you to hear you out, it makes it transactional, in the sense that if you give me a minute and 30 seconds to show you this video that's really well done in a story format, or for me to relate my experience in the first few minutes of us meeting together, in exchange for stealing some of that time, I'm going to give you an opportunity to feel an emotion. I'm going to give you an opportunity to laugh or to empathize. All those things that remind us what is good and kind of distinctly unique about being human in the first place.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is that stories are proof that you're doing what you say you're going to do. So when you can show the impact of your products and services, or if you're a nonprofit organization, the impact of your mission, what it looks like in real life terms, then that is proof that you are fulfilling the mission that you said you set out to fulfill.
Yeah.
And it's a reason why storytelling is not, it's not something that you can kind of just put on the calendar and be like, oh yeah, we told great stories in 2019. And you kind of have checked that box. Because stories are proof, you need to have a commitment to an ongoing process of telling stories. It simply has to become part of the way that you communicate, not because it's trendy, not because it's a buzzword, but because it is proof that you are continuing to fulfill. You're only as good as your most recent story, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the reason to keep things current and kind of up to date.
Yeah, I love that. And I think also, for testimonials too, a good testimonial tells a story about working with you, which I think is connectable. All right, let's rewind. I want to talk about you, the entrepreneur. Not a lot of, I shouldn't say not a lot of, we are seeing more entrepreneurs, I think more than ever before, because of COVID and people reconnecting with their own personal values and their own, bringing it back to your company, their own purpose. And you launched this company in January of this year, right? So we're just talking about 25 days ago.
Yep.
And so what was your purpose for launching this new company?
I'm probably different than a lot of people that you talk to, John, in the sense that I'm a delighted entrepreneur, but I was an unintentional entrepreneur. So Stereo is the successor company to One Brand Studio, which was my previous business, and which really One Brand Studio started as a solo freelance career that spun into something much bigger than I expected. And when I started One Brand Studio almost 20 years ago, my intent was just to freelance for a bit. I was leaving a nonprofit job where I was internal creative studio lead, and it had been a great job, but I was burnt out. I was ready to do something different. And you don't interview well when you're pissed off, right? So at the time being, I decided I'm going to leave that job and kind of decompress for a bit, and then I will move to the next thing. And what I found was that at the time, there weren't a whole lot of creatives who could interface well with sort of large organizations, nonprofit driven kind of nonprofit focus. And so a niche developed there. And over the past 15 or 20 years following that, that was the bulk of the work that we did was for nonprofit mission-driven groups. And they could be public-private partnerships like MEDC or Downtown Detroit Partnership, groups like that. But really brand design and development for those. And Stereo is a relaunch to double down on the strategic focus of what we do. The name Stereo implies kind of a left channel, right channel, right? And in the left channel, we see culture and mindset, and in the right channel, we see brand. And we don't think that you're going to be able to do much meaningful as a company of purpose without having both of those channels in sync with each other, playing together. And so we exist to instigate that. We exist to help clients really get their culture and their mindset firing totally in sync with what they want their brand to be about. And because what we're achieving for, and this is not for everybody, we think this is rare air, but we would say that the highest purpose of a brand is to move the planet forward. That if, and again, that's not for everybody. It's optional, right? The vast majority of businesses are not going to choose to do that. We don't make a value judgment on that. We would just say those aren't our clients. Our clients are the ones who are convinced that business can be so much more. And they don't want to miss that opportunity. And so they might come to us very successful and say, when we started this enterprise a few decades ago, we intended to not just make money, but to do this thing. And we recognize that we've been successful, but we haven't quite been able to accomplish the social good or the broader impact that we wanted to do. Help us figure out apply agency thinking, apply creative agency thinking, and filter it through that lens so we can find a way to do that.
I love it. Well, congratulations to you. And that's always really exciting, starting a new business. What advice would you give somebody who's looking to start a new business today? What's one piece of advice you would give them that would maybe have made it easier for you even 21 years ago, or maybe in January of this new company?
This will sound like I'm gratuitously hat tipping to you, and I'm not. I mean this in all sincerity. Hire a business coach as soon as you possibly can. Even before you can. The secret to
I agree with that.
Yeah. And hire
I
John.
really do. I mean, even if it's not me, I agree with it. Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know, I can't speak to anybody else's experience. From my experience when I was starting, I always had this impression that the biggest challenges I was going to face would be external.
Yeah.
They would be things that weren't coming from me that I couldn't control. And I can tell you unequivocally that the only challenges that you will face that are meaningful, the only challenges that you will face that will prevent you from achieving what you want to achieve with your business is stuff that originates from within and in your thinking.
Yeah.
And it's not that just evolving your thinking, improving your mindset, framing your problems and your opportunities better is magic. The work still has to be done.
Right.
But what our thinking does is it definitely increases or limits our possibilities just based on what we bring ourselves and kind of the way that we bring ourselves mentally to the task.
Absolutely.
So the advice is to get coaching early and get it often and continue it because you never grow out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you really got to invest in yourself because you get in your own way and you have tunnel vision and you need somebody to expand that and really kind of dig deep. I agree.
It feels good to blame somebody else until it doesn't. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And then it's like,
yeah. Coaches, mentors, all really, really important. Hey, quick question. I don't know if this person chimed in, but do you know Paul Rogers?
I don't. It doesn't sound familiar.
Oh, anyway, he made a comment, so I didn't know if you knew him. He's a guy I'm using for some stuff. All right, so let's do a quick speed round. You ready?
Sure.
All right. The number one thing a company needs to do to realize that their brand needs to evolve.
Well, brand's leadership driven. So the thing they've got to realize is that for better or worse, what they've achieved or they haven't is going to ultimately be tracked back to leadership. And so if you want to solve a brand problem or if you want to increase, grow the strength of an already strong brand, it starts at the leadership level.
Yep.
So that's where you start. You don't start in the marketing department.
Good. Love that. Favorite book and why?
Oh, man. Getting Things Done changed my life.
Oh,
that's David Allen.
I was referred to you. We met each other through Jim Nazinski, and that is a wealth manager of Motive Wealth. That is his favorite book.
Yeah. I have to tell you
I read that book because of him. Yeah.
That book has a hold on me where if I'm ever even feeling anxious about something, sometimes I will just pick that book up and hold it.
Yeah.
And kind of infuse the knowledge that's in that book. But it gave me a pattern and discipline for processing what can be an overwhelming amount of information and responsibilities.
That's great. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Man. I want it to be good, John.
So do I, DJ.
I think just the example, my dad was a nonprofit leader. And so he was in business, but he was in a business of helping people. And I think that's definitely gave it in part, it wasn't like a phrase, but just the sort of the example that he set imparted a wealth of wisdom about how you could use your life and the way that you could use it to not just benefit yourself, but to benefit other people. And that's a through line for everything that I want to do as a branding person and as a branding agency, which I feel is kind of contrary to that. So much of advertising in the space that I'm in is so sycophantic and image driven and kind of shallow. And we don't do veneers here. And the reason I don't do veneers is just from the wisdom that I learned from that example.
It's great. Tell everybody, I've really enjoyed talking to you and getting to know you and learn from you. Tell everybody, DJ, how they can connect with you and who your ideal clients are.
Yeah, it's our clients typically are 8 to 9 figure companies. They're established. They've got some momentum. They understand the value of an agency relationship, and they're not intimidated by engaging with an agency that's going to push back to help improve them, make them better. We don't do that to be antagonistic. We do that to help reveal kind of the best version of your company and your brand. We're located in Northville. We work with a lot of companies in Metro Detroit, but have national clients as well. And obviously, what is geography anymore in an era where so much of this is video connected? The website is thisisstereo.com. One of the things that we're doing, if you think that potentially we could be, if there's something that sparks interest in this conversation, when you go to This Is Stereo, your first visit there, a pop-up will open for a strategy sprint workshop that we're offering in quarter one. And it's called The Downbeat. And the idea is that coming out of 2020, a lot of business owners that we talk to and executives are feeling kind of beat down by what they experienced in 2020. And so how do we flip that on its head and instead deliver the downbeat? And the downbeat is kind of part diagnostic, part strategy session, and then gives you a plan to address what are the 3 kind of critical challenges that you are facing as you begin this year, that if you can solve those challenges will improve your odds of being where you want to be on December 31st, 2021 with your business, your goals and objectives. And then what we are doing in that workshop is whiteboarding a way to develop strategy such that your brand and your corporate culture can conspire together to help you achieve those goals and resolve the conflicts that you've got in those 3 areas that you've identified. So the downbeat is something we're doing in quarter 1. And it's a way to work together in a limited scope engagement just to see if we're right for each other. Take some of the fear out of potentially engaging a new agency relationship.
I think it's great. What's the cost of that?
It starts at around $3,500.
Okay.
And then there's for nonprofits that are less than 50 headcount, there are negotiated rates for that.
Okay, good. I think that's great. You can never have enough knowledge. It's so critical.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, hey, I appreciate getting to know you. If anybody's interested in that class, reach out to DJ. DJ, thanks, man. This was great. I just want to recap a couple things that I thought were worth mentioning. Purpose is the force that moves your team. You got to be purposeful in things that you do. You guys are a possibility company. Branding is a gut feeling. Trust is based on reputation. Marketing is the spread of ideas, and branding is the idea. Yeah. So, and share your story, know your message. Stories are proof, and you're only as good as your most recent story. So, everybody grow your brand, grow your business. I appreciate everybody listening. And if you need DJ, reach out to him. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Till tomorrow. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, DJ.